I'm David Gosnell. This is a presentation of appearances I have made on media outlets as an editor and analyst for a business publication about payment cards. The first is a debate in 2004 over ATM fees on the PBS program Chicago Tonight with then Illinois Lieutenant Governor Patrick Quinn, who is now the governor of Illinois, and Randy Krosner, a former governor with the Federal Reserve Board. Governor Quinn had proposed banning ATM fees at banks that hold state deposits. The second is a 2002 appearance on the ABC network program Business Week about debit card fees. The third is as an expert source on a National Public Radio Morning Edition story about the growing threat of fraud at ATMs.
Live from WTTW 11, this is Chicago Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Phil Ponce. Bob Surratt is off this week. On Chicago Tonight, are consumers being taken advantage of by double fees at the ATM? Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn thinks so. Elizabeth Brackett and her panel will look at the ATM fee issue. Now to Elizabeth Brackett and one man's quest to rein in ATM fees. Elizabeth.
Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn put on his old consumer advocate hat and stood in the Bank One Plaza on Sunday to demand that banks stop charging customers twice for one ATM transaction. But can banks afford to set those fees aside? Well, here with some answers are Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn, David Gosnell, senior editor of ATM and Debit News, a Chicago-based industry newsletter, and Randy Krosner, professor of economics at the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. Well, Lieutenant Governor, why shouldn't banks be able to charge fees for their ATM usage?
Well, they're double dipping, and I think it's unfair to customers. I used to be the state treasurer of Illinois, and I remember one day one of my workers went to a bankers convention, and they had a consultant giving a lecture on how to assess unfair and artificial fees on unsuspecting customers. And that's what I think this is. It isn't based on operational cost. When ATMs came along about a quarter century ago, we were told this was going to save the customer money and the bank money. Instead, they're using these fees. In the case of ATMs, with their double dipping fees, they have a surcharge on the basic ATM fee. They're hitting customers twice, and I think that's wrong. And I don't think that these big banks that want the state deposits, the deposits of the state of Illinois, and they want all these contracts, we should give them the contracts unless they're willing to get rid of the ATM fees that are unfair.
Well, before we get to there, let me ask you, David Gosnell, is this really double dipping by the banks?
It's double dipping with the consumers who are paying twice when they use an ATM that's not their bank's own ATM. But a bank doesn't collect both of those fees. It typically would collect only one fee if the bank's ATM is being used by a person that's not its own customer. Or it will collect what's called a foreign fee if its own customer uses someone else's ATM. So no banks collect both fees. So it's double dipping with two organizations collecting from the same one individual.
Do the banks need these fees in order to operate financially successfully?
Well, just think about what happened after we started introducing surcharges. The number of ATMs took off, both regular ATMs in banks as well as in more innovative places like grocery stores, elsewhere. There's a lot more convenience.
And Governor, should we pay for the convenience of using an ATM other than our own banks?
With all due respect, I think that's a lot of baloney. I think that the fees are way above the operational costs of the banks. They've used this as a profit center. They make $15 billion a year in these surcharge fees on customers. One bank, the largest bank, Bank One, which is soon to be Chase, which will be a $1 trillion bank, the second largest in the United States, has over 1,000 ATMs in Illinois, and other banks have lots and lots of ATMs. But it's in the interest of the banks to have these facilities because their customers can communicate with them in a quicker way.
Does this cover the bank's costs on ATMs or not?
No. ATM surcharges do not cover a bank's costs on ATMs. Now, typically, a non-bank ATM program
Pat Quinn get his $15 billion?
Well, he's also counting the foreign fees that are charged their own customers to use someone else's ATM. Now, they do quite often make quite a bit of money off of their debit card programs, and that's one of the fees that they do make money off of. But ATMs are not a moneymaker for banks generally, because somewhere around 80%, according to our own survey, somewhere around 80% of all customers at a bank's own ATMs are their own customers who don't pay a surcharge or a foreign fee. So they get no revenue from most of the use of that ATM. On the other hand, the foreign fee, you're right, they do make a lot of money. A lot of banks make a lot of money off of the foreign fees that they charge their own customers to use another's ATM.
Additional cost. There's the interchange fee that you pay as a bank.
To the bank does charge an interchange fee, and it's typically around 40 cents or so to 55 cents per transaction.
The customer?
The bank has to pay that to the network.
To the ATM, no, the ATM owner. They pay to the ATM.
All right, wait a minute. How does it work? Take us through it.
Oh, no, we're not getting into this little spider web of fees.
This is
exactly what the bankers want.
Has to pay.
What's that?
It's a cost that the bank has to pay.
Yes.
So are you saying that legitimizes a charge for someone?
An interchange. That's correct. And a switch fee to a network. There's two fees involved.
So does that legitimize the charge for you?
Most of the large debit card issuers charge much more than those two add up to.
Well, how much are you paying for your debit card charges?
Business Week Money Talks is just ahead.
Business Week Money Talks, the business news and consumer finance program.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jill Bennett at the American Stock Exchange.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Scott Engler.
There are an estimated 263 million Americans with some sort of outstanding debit card. And nowadays, some banks are starting to charge their customers extra for certain types of debit transactions. Now, the merchant has to pay more money to the bank when a customer uses a signature-based debit card, so it's higher cost for the retailer, but more revenue for the banks.
The debit card issuers get at least twice as much, if not 3 to 4 times as much, if consumers use the signature-based function to purchase items at point-of-sale locations than they would get if the consumers used a PIN-based function, as in the ATM type, put your PIN number in.
David Gosnell is the senior editor of ATM and Debit News in Chicago. He contends banks use disincentives, such as charges, to get you to switch to signature-based cards. Or the banks roll out incentives, which include free air miles or long-distance minutes.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Renee Montaigne. Criminals are getting more sophisticated about snooping on ATMs. ATM skimming is when debit card information is stolen while the customer is using the machine. NPR's Chris Arnold reports now from the Boston area, where crooks have been skimming hundreds of thousands of dollars from bank customers.
The Bank of America ATM machine on South Willow Road in Manchester, New Hampshire, sits in the middle of a busy parking lot at the mall. Manchester Police Detective Dan Rivard says dozens of people had their debit card information stolen here recently by thieves using a magnetic card reader and a little hidden camera. Then they use equipment that you can easily buy over the internet to make duplicate ATM cards. Banking industry groups in the U.S., though, downplay the problem of ATM skimming, saying it only amounts to a tiny fraction of ATM transactions, but that's not the case in other countries.
Fraud losses are far higher in Canada.
David Gosnell is the editor of ATM and Debit News. He says these kinds of debit card losses are 15 times greater per capita in Canada, and they're also much higher in the UK. He says skimming is just caught on there a lot more. As a result, those countries are implementing a new, more secure ATM card system with encrypted computer chips on the cards. Gosnell says organized crime groups in Canada will turn their sights south.
The criminal gangs will and are, as we speak, attacking the electronic payment system in the United States.
And in the skimming case in the Boston region, a suspect indicted earlier this month by a federal grand jury was actually picked up by the U.S. Border Patrol on the Canadian border.